Why does the 50s sound like this? The 50s was an era of complete and total transformation. America just emerging from the rubble of World War II. It's a time where new trends and culture were eager to be set. Music from the 60s is instantly recognizable. With the gear, the musicians, the genre at the time, it's easy to pick out that romantic, dreamy, warm feeling that you would hear from a jukebox in the 50s. But truly, what is that difference that sets it apart from the rest of the decades? Let's look at the gear, culture, and talent that was in a studio in the 1950s. Starting off with the gear, I have two words: tube and tape. The warm sonic space that is iconic of this era was largely due to tubes being used in microphones and amplification. Tubes are known for a warm, rich color, and when they're pushed a little bit too hard into distortion, it's now a very sought after effect, but back then it was something that was trying to be avoided. The 50s being pretty primitive in terms of audio recording technology compared to where we are now, fidelity was trying to be preserved at every step of the way. So let's talk about microphones. Ribbon was the king here. When thinking about the 1950s, the RCA-44 comes to mind. This was a large and heavy ribbon microphone, and ribbon microphones are known for that emphasized low end. And with the RCA-44, this specific model was known for its pronounced proximity effect. Proximity effect is the closer a microphone gets to the source, the more emphasized the low frequencies will be. This RE20 that I'm speaking into right now has these slits in the side to try to mitigate that effect. But the RCA-44 did not have that. And that proximity effect wasn't necessarily a bad thing. This mic was used to great effect in broadcasting. Radio hosts would have it right up close to their face to have a deep, booming, authoritative presence when broadcasting. This also made it very popular among male, lower baritone crooners of the time. Think Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, just to name a few. This low, rich sound, coupled with their baritone register and intimate singing style, gave that warm, dreamy vocal tone that is so synonymous with 1950s ballads. However, with the rise of television, the artist's image was so important. And that brings us to our next mic, the Shure 55S. It's hard to talk about the 1950s or just microphones in general for that fact without discussing the Shure 55S. This is just the iconic image of a microphone. And it's easy to see why. This microphone was put on every broadcast of the time. Every artist performance, every public broadcast, public address from a head of state. But why? We were just talking about how amazing the RCA-44 was. Well, there's one issue with that microphone on television. It's huge. And if you want it right in front of the vocalist's mouth, it's going to be covering half their face. There needed to be a new microphone king, perfect for television, perfect for image. And the Shure 55S was that mic. Perhaps most famously used by Elvis. It's even called the Elvis mic. This mic was used all over the place, even for public addresses from John F. Kennedy and Henry S. Truman. And of course, the historic I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. It's no surprise this microphone had a long-lasting legacy as the image of a microphone. It was the mic that everyone saw the king of rock and roll use. It was the microphone that people saw when presidents were giving important information to the public. And it was even the microphone in people's minds during a pivotal civil rights movement. The cultural impact of this microphone extends beyond music. Now let's talk about the dominant name of amps in the 1950s, and it without a doubt was Fender. The Fender Tweed amps were no doubt the most used and recorded amps of this time. The Fender Tweeds, the Deluxe, the Princeton, the Bassman, these all were used on countless records of the time. Think Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, B.B. King, Buddy Holly. These were the name of rhythm and blues, rock and roll. Such a guitar-forward genre. Discussing amps of this era, it's also important to discuss an accidental innovation that happened at the time. The guitar player on Rocket 88, Willie Kizart, had his amp damaged. The cone had holes and slices in it. To keep it in place and in working order, newspaper was stuffed in to repair it. But this loose newspaper conflicting with the cone of the actual speaker caused this distorted buzzing sound. Now, the engineer on the song actually liked the sound, and it was in the final record. This is one of the first uses of intentional distortion on a guitar tone, and set a precedent that we're going to explore a lot more in the 60s video to come. In the early 50s, you were limited to one track. This meant everyone in the same room at the same time, playing live around the same microphone. The RCA 44 was good at this because it had a figure 8 pattern, which means it picked up in front and it picked up the back. So what they would do is they would have the artist or the singer be right in front of the microphone singing into it, and then they would have the band on the other side of the microphone playing with all the instruments. And it wasn't a multi-track recording. You couldn't mix, you couldn't adjust volume after the fact. It was all being printed right to tape there. So you had the louder instruments farther back and the quieter, more treble instruments closer to the microphone. You had to mix actually in the room. You decided where you wanted to put players, where you wanted to put musicians to get the right balance of the sound that you wanted. Now this also meant that all tracks were mono. Mono meaning one, it was just one signal. Now we have stereo music, which is a different signal going to the left ear and a different signal going to the right ear, giving you the illusion of space, dimension, and direction. This is one of the biggest difference when comparing music made today and music made in the early 50s. It wasn't until 1957 where vinyl records could actually be cut in stereophonic, where consumers could actually play back a stereo signal. This was a huge thing of marketing these singles and these albums. Every cover had "now in stereophonic" on the cover. And that brings me kind of to my next talking point, which is the medium in which music is being consumed has, I'd say, the biggest effect on how music is created. If you think about the biggest shifts in music recording and how music is being written, it coincides with big shifts on how music is being consumed. Music is for the people, music is for an audience. Well, the 1950s was kind of a beginning of a rebellious stage. Elvis Presley was known as rebellious and a disruptor in terms of mainstream music. I mean, his music sounds pretty tame now, but back then it was something outlandish and out there, and almost like a guilty pleasure that you didn't really want people to know that you enjoyed. This was the start of rhythm and blues being accepted into the mainstream. Think of artists like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Ray Charles, Miles Davis, Duke Ellington. These are iconic names that we all know now. This reflection of what's going on in society and what's going on in culture being reflected into music. This was the time of the civil rights movement. The African American voice was becoming louder and also becoming more accepted. Teenagers rebelling against the post-war conformity of their parents found a lot of this high energy, edgy rock and roll and rhythm and blues very enticing and refreshing and new. This was really the start of people associating an identity with music, kind of introducing a new purpose of music. It became more personal and it became more you. In the 50s, the way that you consumed music was vinyl records, the radio, or a jukebox. In the 1950s, radio was king. Radio stations started adopting the top 40 format. DJs like Alan Freed that helped push rock and roll into the mainstream, and shows like the Moondog Show that helped put black artists into the spotlight. And then there's vinyls. The 45 RPM vinyl single that was introduced in 1949 revolutionized the industry. These small records that were cheap to produce, cheap to buy, caused new music from new up-and-coming artists to spread like wildfire through communities. These singles were perfect for the jukebox. By 1953, over 750,000 jukeboxes were in operation around the United States. These jukeboxes put a soundtrack to time out with friends at a diner, at a bar. It made music a topic of conversation, and it made music so much more of an everyday thing. You also can't forget artists like Johnny Cash, mixing the twang of country with the energy and drive of rock and roll. Rockabilly was born in the South, where country and blues already coexisted. The mix of electric guitars with country-style twang singing was an exciting new genre. You also can't forget about doo-wop, a genre almost defined by a chord progression, the unmistakable vocal harmonies that instantly take you back to the 1950s. With groups like the Platters or the Drifters, this sonic texture was great in slow ballads. These genres really defined the culture of the 1950s. This era set a precedent of breaking down racial barriers and setting everyone on an equal playing field when it came to art. Not only was this era of music and the culture that came with it absolutely beautiful, but also really pivotal in American history. New technologies and a strong youth culture made this era an era of change and innovation. Boundaries being broken, genres being bent, amps being broken, and lots of money being spent. Modern producers have the 1950s to thank for the 12-bar blues, for distortion, for singles. Let me know some of your favorite songs and some of your favorite artists from the 1950s. Throughout the research process of this video and shooting it, whenever I had any downtime, I put on some 50s music. I absolutely love the sound of the 50s. It's really hard to find a decade of music I really don't like, but there is something cinematic, Disney, dramatic that I love and that I associate with the 50s. And if there's anything about music history that you would like to see me cover, or anything in this video that you want me to delve into a little bit more in detail, let me know in the comments. And of course, if there's anything I missed, leave that in the comments as well. I can't really encapsulate a whole decade in a YouTube video. I understand that. Just kind of giving an overview, giving my thoughts, letting you know what I think of when I think of this decade. Make sure to like, subscribe, engage, all that good stuff. Got a lot of future videos planned. Really exciting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.